All right, this is the Drupal usability meeting for October 9th, 2018. And we discussed to continue looking at the confirm forms for destructive operations. Did all of us have a chance to look at the issue yet? It's 2773205. And we discussed that last week that there's a bunch of different approaches in core to how to implement that. And Jacob Rokovitz did some research and made a lot of screenshots in the issue in terms of how different operations, how different areas react to this question. Let me find out this one. Yes. So when you uninstall, or when you uninstall a module, it tells you that all data from these modules will be lost. Do you still want to continue? When you delete a node, it says this action cannot be undone, and puts the title of the node up here, while the module is somewhere included inside here. A bunch of the other entities, I guess, are similar. When you delete a custom block, etc., it's very similar to nodes, except that it also tells you that it will remove two placed block instances, but it doesn't tell you which two of them there are. If you delete something from a book, it tells you it's part of a book outline and has associated child pages, and those will be relocated, but not deleted. If you delete a comment, it actually shows up in the front theme, and any replies to this comment will be lost. There may or may not be replies. If you delete a contact form, that's a lot more technical. I guess it tells you like which actual other configurations will get lost, which is not very similar to how blocks are deleted, which also have some configuration deleted with them. So yeah. So there's a lot of different depth in terms of what we tell our users in terms of the extent of their actions. And there's a lot of inconsistency for sure. And this is just a small sample of all the things that have been screenshot, like a field one looks really scary. Or maybe not scary enough. I guess it depends.
One of the things I remember we were talking about last week was these configuration updates are useful for people who code, but for a lot of site builders, these won't necessarily mean a whole lot if they don't deal directly with configuration files. So warning message-wise, that's kind of a corollary, is making certain that when we talk about things, knowing who the audience is for these warning pages. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. I apologize.
No, I was just paging through the issue, looking at some of the previous comments. So I guess we talked last week really about the developer experience, that we should provide some sort of base form that lists the various things. And the previous comments talk about accessibility. And I guess we sort of need a decision of what the common elements are. And then maybe someone needs to take a pass at creating the standard base form class. Is that about where we are?
Yeah.
Also, something that we said last week was that probably an option could be to use pop-ups to don't need to go to another page, to don't have these two steps that is loading another page and using a pop-up. But sometimes we really don't need a pop-up. Probably something like, I don't know, for example, you are on the note edit form and you want to delete that note. Maybe you really don't need a pop-up. Maybe something that just appears under the delete button, and you press delete and it says, are you sure you want to delete, but just with a text under the button. I mean, it doesn't need to be a pop-up for that, for this really small thing. Of course, if you end up with a super huge form with, for example, when you are disabling, I don't know, 20 modules or something like that, I mean, it's not a good pattern, but probably we should try to think on different patterns. Also, because of the user probably is different, and also because some of them are really small ones and maybe we really don't need a second step. Those are more or less the thoughts that we have.
So I guess the title of the issue refers to highly destructive operations. So
okay.
If we're deleting something that doesn't have widespread ramifications, then we don't have to worry about it here.
How do we track things that are highly destructive versus non-highly destructive within the Drupal architecture? Meaning, like, if we're going to differentiate between those two use cases, how do we know what the complete list in core of everything is that does something destructive, and then what the subset of that is? How do we mark that and track that as highly destructive?
So that, I don't think there's any easy answer to that. The idea is that if either this can't currently be deleted until you delete a bunch of other stuff, or if deleting this will automatically delete a bunch of other stuff, and then there has to be some sort of quantification for what a lot means. That's what it means to be highly destructive, that it affects a bunch of other things.
Oh, I understand the definition. I meant, how do we make certain that we've tracked everything? So is that something where you note it? Is it a comment in the code? So for each of these highly destructive classes, you note it in the class. How do we track it to make certain that in the future, we have a pattern where someone adds some new functionality that has the capacity to be destructive and or highly destructive? How do we know that we're not, that things aren't being added or being lost, that we've missed, that we've accounted for 70%, for instance, of the highly destructive behaviors?
I guess first, before finding a pattern, we should find an example of each one. I mean, I would say, for example, deleting a node, it's not a highly destructive thing, but maybe uninstalling a module that actually is disabling our stuff, it could be highly destructive. I don't know.
No, I definitely agree with definitions. I'm just curious how we make certain we have a full inventory. So we have a partial inventory. Perhaps it's a full one, that this is everything that Jacob was able to find. But my question is, how do we notate it so that we can always find this within the code base moving forward? It's something I don't necessarily understand about Drupal because everything seems to be developed in its own silo. So I didn't know if there's a way to track it and make certain that we don't lose this in the future.
Well, if we are to use a common UI element, then the use of that common UI element in the code would be indicative of which items we use the UI element for.
Yeah, there's a documentation for that.
Okay,
that makes sense to me. Thanks.
Right, and this issue is about providing that common pattern, that base form class, rather than deciding what counts as highly destructive.
Right. So now we that is our next step, as you were saying earlier, is to build that base class and say this is how we want the pattern to look like, and then having code that is capable of doing that, and then having the things we've identified as highly destructive initially, moving them over to use that new pattern. Is that correct? Or that new element?
Yes. And I think what we need at this point is an issue summary update. And I will make an attempt at doing that after this call. We need to say what the remaining tasks are.
Yeah.
I would say the remaining tasks are to identify the common elements. So look through the screenshots that Jacob provided and decide, we certainly need a delete it and a cancel button. I think we'll want a list of other things that will be removed. And I'll look through the screenshots and see if there are any other common elements. And then we need to design the interaction. So are we going to have a modal? Are we going to have a separate page load? And then whichever of those we choose, what is it going to look like? And then implement the or provide the base class. Is there anything else that should be added to the list of remaining tasks?
Come up with a design.
Say again?
Come up with a design.
Well, that was the second thing I said, design the interaction. Or do you think that's something separate?
Yeah. I mean, first will be the interaction itself, and secondly something like a wireframe or more like an idea.
Okay.
To see if it has to be a button or a pop-up or I don't know, whatever. And then a design.
Can we say mock up a design?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I'll paste into the chat my current bullet list, and I will later update the issue summary with that. And I'll even take a stab at doing the first item on the list.
Okay.
And just scrolling through the issue, I don't see any proposed designs, do I? Oh, there is one in comment 12.
I think that's more like a screenshot of. Okay, no, it's a proposal.
Yeah, I think that's what they're currently using in the migrate module, the migrate UI module, or the upgrade, whatever.
Okay, so here we need to decide that I don't know if now or at some point, if we really want to change completely the interaction or not. I mean, if we really want to go to a new page or not. And if we don't want to go to a new page, what should we actually do in the same page?
So looking at the screenshots in comments 12 and 14, sometimes there's going to be a long list of related stuff that will be deleted. And that sort of argues for making it a separate page, I think.
Yes, but most of the time it won't be a huge list. I mean, most of the time the actions the user will do will be like delete a node, delete a block, delete a comment, or something like that. Probably there will be a 20% of action or of situations, or probably much less than that, where you will need this huge form. But on most of the situations, the list can even be bigger, because if you are just on the edit form of a node and you are deleting, you only have one node to delete because it's the one you are in. So I'm not really sure we should do exactly the same on both situations.
Well, but
In a user perspective, I mean, of course, on a Drupal perspective, where let's do something that is going to be useful on each situation. Of course, the next page, a separate page, is the more situation-proof, strange situation-proof. But I don't think it's the best option in a usability perspective.
But if you're just deleting a single node, then it's not highly destructive, and so you wouldn't want to use this pattern.
Yeah, that's the thing that I was saying. I'm not really sure if all the actions listed here are highly destructive, and I'm not really sure if the difference between them should be really what makes us decide between having two of them should be actually the long list, or the, I don't know, how dangerous it is. I mean, how do you decide how dangerous is an action from this list? Which one?
I don't know if we're saying that it's dangerous per se, so much as it impacts a larger volume of information. So when we say highly destructive, it sounds like it's talking about a chain of deletes. So when you delete this one thing, there's other things that are dependent upon the thing that you're deleting that will also be deleted, versus a deletion that results in only a single piece of content being deleted.
Are you sure that that's the difference? I mean, let's say that you're deleting the node that is on your front page. Your home, you're deleting the node for your home without realizing. I mean, that's as important as deleting 20 old news.
But I think the difference is it's not highly destructive. That would be a different pattern. That would be a protected piece of content, or some other approach. It wouldn't have a cascade effect in when you delete a field that is maybe bundling other fields, and then suddenly you're removing 3 pieces of configuration and impacting multiple config files, which to me fell under the definition of highly destructive.
Okay, and how do you define that? I mean, so you're saying some kind of cascade where something depends on another thing or something like that. How do you really make a pattern? I don't know how to say that. I mean, where do we decide which ones?
Yeah, that was kind of how. That's what I was trying to ask. How do we? That's what I wanted to know, is how do we know? So we know there's this list of destructive actions, and then I was curious how we know we've done that. And so by having something choose to use the element, we can then say anything that chooses to use this particular UI element is self-identifying itself as highly destructive. So it's not that we're enforcing the pattern, we're making a pattern available and then saying that when something is identified that can make a good use of that pattern, then it uses it, and everything else would default back to the old way of a delete. Is that correct, Gabor?
That's what I was thinking too.
Yeah.
So in essence, there's two patterns. One pattern is the one that already exists, but it should, we define that it should be used in non-highly destructive patterns, and it's already in use everywhere. And then we selectively go in and identify things that we feel are problematic, like deleting a vocabulary versus deleting a vocabulary term. And that vocabulary term, now this is where for me it gets hard, because if the UI element we choose to use for deleting a vocabulary term ignores the fact that it has a child, does that mean that you have two different types of interactions for terms? Meaning a term with children and a term without children.
So again, we don't have to decide that. We provide the pattern, and then the maintainers of the taxonomy module might decide that if a term has no descendants, then we'll use the simple delete form. And if the term does have descendants, it will use the highly destructive form that we're talking about here. But that decision is up to them, not us.
Yep, okay, makes sense.
So do we have this pattern? I mean, when something has something that depends on it, is that the pattern?
Not sure what you're asking.
Yeah, I mean, do we have the pattern that we are going to follow or to provide to decide which one is highly destructive and which one is not? Is that just that something depends on it? I'm just trying to follow a little bit.
We do not yet have a design. We have a bunch of screenshots that Jacob provided of existing deletion forms, confirmation forms, and we have a couple of screenshots in comments 12 and 14.
Sorry, I meant I was meaning that if what sorry, I don't remember if what Thomas was saying about these situations where you're deleting, for example, a term that has a child, or you're deleting a vocabulary that already has some terms. That's a pattern. I mean, when the thing that you're deleting, something depends from it. I mean, that will be a pattern to provide to people to decide that, isn't it? I mean, are we trying to first decide which patterns, which situations are the highly destructive ones?
I think that's what Benji was saying, is that we're not going to determine which ones are highly destructive. We're simply going we're going to assume that there's a pattern where there are things. So for instance, if we're looking about designing an interaction, we're going to assume that there is the potential for there to be children. So we need to have some way of showing what things would be impacted. So rather than just being a message, you may delete a bunch of stuff, it would be, you may delete these things, or something like that.
Okay. I see now. So the end result is that you have more text, actually, because something is saying to you, hey, you're not only deleting that, you're only affecting all these other things, so you are adding more text on the UI.
For this particular issue, I think what we're saying is that we would create a UI that would provide that information consistently, so that everyone who fell into this pattern would have the option of implementing this UI element rather than the one that already exists. And this one would then make available that kind of information consistently. And there are some things that will list that, like the configuration screenshots of some of the things that delete multiple configuration files. But I think for me, that's still the thing that I'm a little confused by is, I understand if I delete this field, it's going to delete these multiple configuration places, but that's a different piece of information that we're showing than all of the data, like these 50 nodes that are impacted when I delete that field. So if I've got 100 nodes, 50 of which are using or have data in a particular field that I'm deleting, when I delete that field, it's going to delete that data. As a site user, I would anticipate that I would be shown a list saying these 50 nodes are going to be impacted. Or do you want to export? You've got more than 10. Do you want to export a list of everything that will be impacted before you say yes type interface? I don't know if that's what we're anticipating, or if it's just messaging where we're saying you are permitted to do this with a particular permission level, and taking this action is going to delete a whole bunch of data that is related to this thing.
Yeah, so I think the pattern that we're designing can't get too specific about whether to list the number of things or a complete list of the things or the types of things. Like if you look at the screenshot in comment 14, there is conflicting content of these types. Now, it would be nice if we knew how many nodes of each type are involved, but that's getting into that's more specific than we should be.
And then that makes sense.
Sorry. Okay, so we should try to provide how we list, try to determine how we list the things that are affected. Or for example, if you're deleting a node, you need a list of configuration. So we need to find a pattern to show all these things, all these things affected. And also probably we will need a pattern in case you really need to replace whatever you are deleting. For example, with the image styles, that you have the option to actually replace whatever you're doing. So if you're deleting an image style and some kind of node is or content is using it, you have the choice to select another one. So we should have the description, the list of elements, and also a way of selecting an alternative. Is there any other thing involved here apart from the title?
Could you say again what you have in mind for an alternative?
I mean, it's not an alternative. It's more like a list of elements that we need to have in mind. I mean, we need to have in mind a description, of course. It's just text. We need to have in mind that we are probably going to provide a list. And this list can be simple or not, because probably we're going to list not only configuration, but sometimes different kind of things. And also there are some patterns, like for example, when you're deleting an image style, where you also have the option to choose a replacement for whatever you are deleting.
Right. Also, in deleting a user, you have some choices. But again, I think all of this sort of takes place with the render API available, and I don't think we want to get too specific about how the information is formatted, since we don't know in general what information will be there. I would rather just say, looking at the screenshot in 14, if we do decide to go with something like this, we'll probably want a warning message, and then let them use the render API to use whatever description is appropriate, and then provide the delete and cancel buttons. In this example, there are 2 sections describing this is what will go away. And also, if you look at Jacob's screenshot of deleting the body field, there again are two lists of related configuration that will be affected.
I would note that in the image for 14, he's specifically referencing upgrades. And that seems to be a slightly different pattern. And that uses Jacob's suggestion from last week, where there was some special I acknowledge I may use pattern, where he was suggesting we use the type and delete. And it seems like we had decided last week, at least, that we didn't necessarily want to go to the lengths of saying, I acknowledge I may lose data, continue anyway, as a button type thing. We were talking more about a pattern that used like 2 steps or a confirmation method.
I don't know. I think we are just kind of limiting ourselves to what it is right now and what we know about right now about the UI. And I really feel that if we are designing something, we should have more options available apart from just changing the text, the list, and the text that is on the button, and maybe adding also a message. I mean, we should kind of, I don't know, use this option to really think this pattern. I mean, are we really just giving this form in another page? Can we really think a little bit about actually showing that on a model, or I don't know. I mean, I kind of have this feeling that we are losing this opportunity to improve what we have, apart from improving the text and the things that are there. I don't know. I'm sorry, because what you were saying made a lot of sense, but it's kind of, I don't know. If I had to design the process to delete a form, node, having another page wouldn't be the option, and probably with some of these different situations that we have around here. I know the safe one is opening a new page, because we can have there a lot of information. We can place anything there. We are not putting ourselves or limiting ourselves in any way, but we are also just not changing what we have since, I don't know, Drupal 4, I don't know, when this page appeared. I mean, it's a really old pattern. Sorry. I know that not exactly the best. But I don't know. Somewhere in the comments, there was a discussion about using some other patterns, and I don't know, we're kind of missing it.
I know that I would love an opportunity for improving the interface. I don't know how much extra work it is, and I understand Benji's suggestion that we not focus heavily on the specifics of use cases. We want to be more generalized. So could we describe a pattern where we allowed this base class to receive information if provided from, so if I had the taxonomy module and the taxonomy module wanted to give back a list of terms that were going to be deleted when you deleted this one term. So the term is automobiles, and I have an entire family of makes and models and all this stuff under automobile, and I would choose to return. So from our pattern perspective, we don't care what's being returned. We simply would allow the taxonomy module to return to the widget a list. And then what information is being provided would be determined by the taxonomy module group. But our pattern would describe a UI that simply had a place that had certain rules about what they could provide us with for display. And,
I don't have the solution. Anyway, I was just saying that, and I really don't have the solution because I really don't know all the situations that we can have here. I mean, there's this huge list, but I don't know where's the limit for the highly destructive ones, where's the limit for each element that we are adding here.
Also,
I don't know.
Also, it's kind of hard to decide programmatically. So I think the reason that body field delete one is so ugly because we're kind of just displaying different configuration ones. We would delete by type of the configuration entity. And it's hard to measure the extent of the impact.
I don't know, for example, here, what I'm missing, I'm not thinking on classes, I'm not thinking about anything that has anything to do with code, not even CSS or whatever. I'm thinking more on a UX perspective. I mean, I'm missing here the initial point of the process. I mean, how is the form where I'm at the beginning? Can we somehow integrate this communication that we are going to give to the user to this initial form somehow? Because, of course, if we think on a developer perspective, that one is the easy one because we won't have troubles with that. But if we want to think on a UX perspective, we really need to see if there's the possibility to change that. I'm sorry if I'm vibe shedding a little bit. It's just that I'm feeling that we're missing an opportunity here to improve. Of course, adding messages and finding a way to pass all this information through different, I don't know, classes or whatever, it will be an improvement, but on a UX perspective, we are just going to kind of put nicer things on a second page, on another page.
Well, I'm afraid we started late, but it's now a little past 4:30 in my time zone. I have to be getting back to regular work.
Yeah, me too. Apart from this list of tasks that we have here, do we have any other agreement from today? I guess what you were saying to classify the task.
I think one thing we have some consensus on is that we should define the scope of this issue as providing the element to use and not specifying where it should be used.
Yep, I agree.
Okay, so my last question will be, is this issue a design issue, or is this issue something that needs some kind of development?
Both. I think both will be done on this issue.
Okay. Then we have a huge scope here. And it's kind of limiting what we can do here.
So the next step is to start with identify the common elements. So look at all of the images that Jacob provided, and then determine what common elements exist between them. And it should be, I guess, most inclusive rather than least inclusive. If we're trying to find something that's common to everything, is that the next step?
I think so, and I'm willing to take that on.
Cool. I think it sounds like we're done for this week. Is that right, Kapoor and Christina?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all.
See you next week.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Yeah,
Goodbye.
Goodbye.